Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's our pleasure to have you and to see you in our webinar through ICF Kuwait chapter. Before we start, let's put some ground rules and frame for this webinar. It is 60 minutes webinar, and please keep your mic muted. And if you have any comment or question, you can put it in the chat or raise your hand. This webinar have CCEUs, so please check your emails to have your certification of attendance. And at the end, we're going to have a group picture for social media. And the beginning, please let me introduce our guest, Amira Badawey. She is a professional certified coach with 750 hours of coaching. She has 25 years of corporate experience managing transitional projects, facilitating business learnings. Amira has participated in the development of business strategies in multinational organizations and local firms in Egyptian market. And Amira has 15 years of experience in strategy development, and she managed the project in Egypt, Bahrain, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, Canada, and North and South America, Germany, Italy, and UK. And Amira focused in coaching leaders, executives within the Arab region, and have currently worked with individuals from Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. We are very honored and pleasure to have you with us, Amira. We met before 2 years in the Egypt conference, ICF coaching conference. I said, Amira should be with us, giving us all the knowledge, her excellent knowledge, and we have a strategy to learn from the best in Kuwait chapter. So really, I'm honored. We are honored to have you with us, Amira. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Coach Madiha. I mean, I'm honored, and it's also my pleasure to be able to speak to the coaching community in Kuwait through the ICF chapter. It was such a pleasure to meet you. I hope we get a chance to meet again, inshallah. And one of my passions is burnout. I know it's a weird passion to have, but I enjoy talking about stress. It's something. It's a weird thing, but it's also a passion of mine. So thank you so much for the opportunity to spread awareness about, I think this topic, it's becoming very, very important for everyone, not just leaders, not just professionals, but I think everybody could benefit, inshallah, from awareness around this topic, inshallah.
Thank you.
Okay, so should we start? Should we get started? Okay.
Yeah,
let me share my screen. Okie dokie. Okay. So today, inshallah, we're going to talk about burnout. And the idea is to just make sure that we understand what burnout is. Since COVID, this term has been used in various contexts. It's almost been bastardized. So we really want to understand what is burnout and its relationship to stress, and what can we do to recover from this condition and possibly prevent it. And of course, how coaching can help in both those avenues, burnout recovery and burnout prevention. But before we delve into all of that, I would like to introduce you to Atif. This is Atif, and I think we can all empathize and sympathize with Atif. ممكن نتعاطف مع عاطف. This is what I always say in Arabic. I think we've all felt like this at one point or another, where we don't have any energy. Our batteries are depleted. We're demotivated. We're disengaged. We lack focus, passion. We lack drive. We use a lot of these metaphors to kind of describe this condition that Atif is going through. And sometimes this condition, it's ad hoc. It lasts for maybe a few days or a few weeks, and then we can recover. And other times it becomes a bit more difficult, recovering from this condition. We go about doing, you know, our work as normal. We try to recharge through the various ways that we used to recharge with, but somehow they just don't work anymore. And this is when we start to think, well, no, maybe this is different. Maybe this isn't our normal, you know, depleted battery. Something's different this time. And maybe we need to find a form of help because we might be suffering from burnout. So let's see what burnout is. Now, this is the definition of burnout. And interestingly, in 2019, the World Health Organization classified burnout as a psychological syndrome in the International Classification of Diseases. So it's not a mental illness, it's not a mental disorder. It is classified as a psychological syndrome. And therefore, coaching, yes, can help in recovery and prevention. And burnout, it's a psychological state or psychological response to chronic emotional and interpersonal stressors on the job. This was the definition. It always had this professional on-the-job aspect to it. However, I think now with everything that's going on around us, we can kind of drop on the job. It's not necessarily experiencing chronic stress through our work that would cause burnout. I think chronic stress in general, because even if we're feeling the stress from, you know, work requirements and pressure at work, it continues into our lives and vice versa. If we have stress in our lives, it is going to transition into our work. So I think it's safe, especially after COVID. A lot of us are working from home now or have a hybrid kind of setup. So even the boundaries between our work life and our professional life has blurred. So I think it's safe that we can kind of just drop this on the job. So what happens? We start out with this flame that is burning inside of us and giving us kind of this energy, this drive to perform. And then gradually, over a long period of time, this flame starts to, the fuel that was igniting the flame starts to deplete. And because we're not recharging in a way that's helpful and healthy, this flame might extinguish. And this is the root of the word burnout. It means to extinguish. It doesn't mean to burn. So if the flame was extinguished, maybe there's a way to reignite it again. And this is what we want to learn together, inshallah, during our session today. Burnout has 3 manifestations, and I'm going to use the word manifestations. We don't say symptoms because, again, it's not a disease. But there are 3 manifestations. These are main manifestations that show up with any kind of burnout condition. And these are not sequential. It's not like one starts before the other. They can all happen at the same time. But we might, because of our different levels of awareness, we might become aware of one manifestation over the others. However, there's nothing in the research or in the science that states like it starts with this and then moves on to the other manifestation. So we're just going to explain them. This is not, you know, to emphasize any kind of order or priority. The first manifestation is emotional exhaustion. Burnout is characterized by feeling tired. We feel tired. Although it is physical exhaustion, but it is rooted, we feel it physically in our bodies. It is rooted in emotions. And this is important. It's emotional exhaustion. It's not psychological exhaustion. It starts from an emotional place. And then when we don't address it, it causes cognitive exhaustion. And we're going to see that later. So we feel it starts out like we don't want to wake up in the morning. So we keep snoozing our alarm clocks. Or we feel like, you know, our muscles feel kind of lazy and tense and heavy. We're drowsy. We want to sleep. We're just tired. We're tired all the time. So this would be the first manifestation. The second manifestation is callousness and indifference. And we feel these, the callousness and indifference towards the people that we are serving. So if we deal with clients or customers, we would feel indifferent towards our clients and customers. If you are a manager and you're burnt out, you would feel this indifference towards your employees. Of course, if you're an entrepreneur, because entrepreneurs they can get burnt out as well, you're going to feel this indifference towards everybody, your clients, your suppliers, your investors, your employees, because you're actually servicing all of these people. And the reason we feel this indifference, it has to do with the emotional exhaustion, the emotional labor of burnout. Now, the research has shown that usually the high performers, these are the ones who experience burnout. These are the people who put in over 100%, 110%, 150% effort into their jobs. They have actually an emotional attachment to their jobs. So when they start to experience burnout, they feel like they're not doing their best. Although on the surface, externally, their performance wasn't impacted. Like their managers would tell them, you're doing a great job. This is great. This is amazing. Their clients are very satisfied, but they know that they're not giving it the 110 or the 120. So they start to feel guilty. And this is the emotional exhaustion. Guilt is a very heavy emotion, and it is an inhibitory emotion. It stops us from living our lives. It inhibits us from living our lives. So in order to deal with this heavy guilt, they start to create a psychological barrier between themselves and those they're serving through their work, through this indifference and callousness. So they either view their clients or their employees or whatever as villains, so they don't deserve my best, or they start to view themselves as victims, like I don't have enough time, I don't have enough resources, and again, this is all manifested as indifference and callousness. The third manifestation is diminished accomplishments. And this is when the guilt kind of evolves a little bit and maybe veers towards shame. And this is another inhibitory emotion. And this is when we start to ask ourselves, what am I doing? I don't have any skills. Anybody could do my job. I remember when I was burnt out, I used to think that a trained monkey, they get a monkey and they train it a little bit, it will be able to do my job. I don't have any skills. If I leave this job, I can't find another job. I should be thankful for this job. I don't deserve my salary, the perks, the praise. So this is diminished accomplishments. And these are the three manifestations of burnout. And again, all of the research was conducted on burnout in the workplace. But I think as coaches, we've all worked with clients who are dealing with stress. We can see that these three manifestations can exist outside of work. Exhaustion just stays with us everywhere. We can feel callousness and indifference towards our loved ones sometimes when we feel like we're not giving them our best. And of course, we can have diminished accomplishments in our lives in general. This is diminished self-worth. So these three together, these three manifestations constitute the condition of burnout. And burnout as a condition, it was associated with a Japanese word called karushi. This was in the beginning of the 80s, where a lot of young Japanese professionals were they were struggling with the concept that work was everything. They had to build their whole identity around their professional lives. And they just didn't want to embrace this kind of culture, and they started to commit suicide. So the word karushi came out, which means death by overwork. So it was associated with burnout. So let's go back to the definition. So those were the three manifestations, and they happen when we are exposed to chronic stress. Now, what is stress? The definition, this is the scientific definition of stress. It's our body's reaction to any change that requires an adjustment or a response. So any change that we have to respond to or adjust or adapt to will create stress in our bodies. And we will feel this stress physically, mentally, and emotionally. And therefore, there are two types of stress if we look at it from this perspective. We have the eustress and the de-stress. The eustress is often called the positive kind of stress. This is the kind of stress that motivates us to go up and above our normal performance baselines. This is the kind of stress that athletes feel on the pitch when there's like a few minutes left in the match and they're tied and they rally up to get the final goal that takes them to the I don't know, the World Cup or whatever. De-stress is, I mean, this is the unpleasant kind of stress. This is the kind of stress that stops us from performing. And it's really, really harmful. But let's look at the definition again. Stressors on the job, stressors, any kind of stress. So even if the kind of stress that you are exposed to is eustress, the positive kind of stress, but it is chronic, meaning it's everlasting, it doesn't end. You don't have pockets of rest between these iterations of stress, you can still get burnt out. So it's not just about the negative kind of stress. Even eustress can cause burnout. And this is why if we look at sports, because a lot of what we know about stress, we learned from sports. You know, with like the leagues, the UEFA Cup and stuff like that, they have the high seasons where they're playing in the matches and the championship. And then they have the off seasons where they rest, they recover their muscles, their body recovers, but they also continue training so they don't lose their skills. Similarly, we need this in our lives and in the workplace. We need iterations between high stress and pockets of rest where we can recharge ourselves and recover from these peaks of stressful peaks, and also train and work on our skills and our development. So it doesn't matter because, again, within the corporate world and professional world, there's this belief that there's the positive stress that helps people to perform at their best. And a lot of managers and a lot of leaders, they kind of manufacture stress to push their staff to these peak performance levels. But again, if it's prolonged, if it's continuous, it can lead to burnout. Let's see what happens in our minds when we are exposed to chronic stress. So again, stress is any change that comes and challenges the status quo, anything that's going to disrupt the status quo. Anything that can happen, our minds will pick it up and see it as a threat. And therefore, it'll send us a signal. This is usually an emotion. And the emotion that is associated with stress is fear. When there's a threat, our mind just sends us a signal of fear. The objective is for us to take an action. And that action might be to calm our minds, to tell our minds, it's okay. Actually, this is not a threat. This is an opportunity we should get excited about. That could be the action. Once we take an action, that's fine. Our minds calm down. But the problem happens when we don't take an action. And there could be multiple reasons why we don't take an action. We might be overwhelmed with the amounts of threats. We are in a high stressful situation where there's lots of threats. So our minds just keep sending us these signals and we're overwhelmed with all these threats. Or we're overwhelmed with life in general, and we don't have time to kind of catch these signals, these emotions. So when we don't take an action, our mind will take the action for us. It'll start preparing us for an appropriate response to this emotion. And the appropriate response to fear is fight or flight. When you're afraid of something, if it's small enough, you're going to fight it off. But if it's big, you're gonna flee from it. You're gonna run away. How does the mind prepare our bodies for these actions? By secreting hormones and neurotransmitters. But the problem is the kinds of threats that we are exposed to nowadays, these are not physical threats where we're going to physically run away from them or physically fight with them. These are psychological threats. Currency fluctuation, economics, economical fluctuation. Are we going to be able to pay off our payments next month? Our kids, there's any, I mean, the Microsoft outage last week, God knows how that impacted all of us. Somebody had an exam and that exam was on, I don't know, an Azure platform. What's going to happen with the exam? Our kids, what are they going to do? Are they going to find jobs? Does my manager like me? Is AI going to take my job? What am I supposed to do? These are all the kinds of threats. So even when our bodies are prepped to fight or flight, we don't take, we don't take physical actions. It's all in our heads. So these hormones and these neurotransmitters, they stay in our body. And eventually, we start to see everything through the lens of fear. And this messes up our internal kind of alarm system, because we start to see everything as fear. Through fear, we start to see everything as threat. So everything that comes our way sends us a signal, which is fear. We don't take a physical action, so it starts to build up the hormones, and we just stay in this loop. I like to call it the loop of, well, I call it the loop of hell. I don't know if I can use a cursed language. In Arabic, I call it loop al-Gahim. And this is what burnout is, because you're in this state, this endless loop, for a prolonged period of time. And this is why we start to feel, all the physical things that we feel with heightened stress, because we stay in a prolonged state of fight, flight, or freeze. And this is why our immunity system is compromised. This is why we have brain fog and we can't think. We have memory issues because the neurotransmitters are in our brain and we're not using it. And it's all because of this continuous state of fight or flight. And this is why normal stress management techniques really doesn't help a lot in burnout. A lot of coaches, when they get burnout clients, they approach it as stress management, and they start to use stress relieving techniques. What these techniques do, they help us to get rid of this aspect here, the hormones. And when it's like, go for a walk, we're just getting rid of the hormones. Write your thoughts down, we're just getting rid of the neurotransmitters. But because we're staying in this loop, they're just going to build up again. So with burnout, stress management and stress relief techniques are going to give us momentary relief, but it's not going to be sustained. We're going to just fall into the loop again. Because burnout, again, it's a continuous loop, but it's also progressive, meaning that it builds up on itself. And it creates a downward spiral. The longer we stay in this state, the worse the manifestations get, or the symptoms, if you want to call them systems, the more restrictive and limiting they become, and they drag us downwards. And I mean, the longer you stay in this state, the more susceptible you are to become depressed. There is actually a 20% overlap between depression and burnout, meaning that those who are burnt out, the longer they stay in this state, the more susceptible they are to be depressed, and vice versa. Those who are depressed are more susceptible to burnout. So coaching can help, but up to a point. If, of course, you veer towards the depression spectrum of burnout, in this case, you will need therapy and maybe medication. But this is the insidious nature of burnout, that it drags you down. And the longer you stay in this case, in this condition, the worse the manifestations get. Now let's see what happens to our performance when we become burnt out. This is just a very simple graph that I've kind of I drew just to show what happens to our performance. And if we just, remove the word performance and say it's how we live our lives, because we perform at work and we perform at home, it's all performance. Normal states of stress, our performance it peaks and pivots. It's up and down. Nobody performs at a steady state. So there are ups and downs. When normal stress, there are going to be ups and downs, and you consider yourself engaged, and that's okay. But at the same time, we all have this performance baseline, this minimum amount of performance that is acceptable to us. And again, a reminder, those who suffer from burnout are the hardest working people in the organization. So they usually have a performance baseline that is higher than other people. That's even higher than the baseline that the organization puts on them. The problem occurs when our performance starts to pivot below this baseline. This is when the person's going to start to feel uncomfortable. This is not acceptable to them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're burnt out, but they're kind of on the cusp. Sometimes when they catch it early on, they can bounce back and it's okay. But the longer they stay in this state, they start to enter the downward spiral, and it starts to pull them down until we might enter into a negative performance condition. And this is when we've entered the exhaustion funnel. And the only way out of it is we have to reverse this kind of downward spiral. And this is where coaching can help with burnout recovery. Now, this is the De Clementi's and Proshka's stages of change that we all go through when we want to start to implement new habits. And this is very vital to burnout recovery. We had old habits, and old habits kind of helped us fall into the downward spiral of burnout. So in order to climb out, we will have to probably relearn new habits. And that means implementing new habits and unlearning old habits. So De Clementi's and Proshka's stages of change is very important. And as we know, the longer we can stay in this cycle and deal with the relapses in a positive way, learning from each relapse and developing, it creates an upward spiral that propels us out of the exhaustion funnel. And the way we do this is we do implement some stress management techniques because, you know, we have to give the person who's suffering from burnout some relief, but we also implement positive psychology interventions to help our clients develop positive psychology resources or psychological resources that can help them propel out of the cycle. And little by little, we start to kind of enhance the performance, but it's going to be at stages. We can't jump from this negative performance perception to our old levels of performance. It's going to take time. But this is actually how we recover from burnout. It is by balancing between momentary relief, but also working on implementing and learning new habits that would help us come out of this burnout cycle and also sustain recovery. And once we've established either the old performance baselines or new performance baselines, we can start focusing on flourishing. How can we use these new habits to actually flourish and work on our well-being? So this is really the stages that we go through in order to climb out of burnout. And we start to focus on recovery through building our awareness so that we can pick up on these signals that our bodies send us. We have to focus on relief. We have to learn how to recharge our batteries, but differently, and gradually enhance performance. And this is very important because this addresses the relapse stage in the 6 stages of change, because it's not going to be all at once. It happened over multiple weeks, multiple months. So it's going to take some time, and it's going to be gradual. Once we've recovered and we're climbing out of this downward spiral, the way we work on burnout prevention is through resilience, learning how we teach our clients how to be resilient. We teach them how to build their psychological capital, which is hope, optimism, resilience, and efficacy. So enhanced self-agency and self-efficacy is very, very important. But also we have to kind of redefine our relationship with things like productivity or performance, stress, and also our sense of self. Because our habits in these 3 dimensions probably led us to burnout. And then we can start capitalizing on these psychological capitals in building our well-being. And this can help us to flourish. So these are kind of like the steps towards burnout. And I call this burning on instead of burning out. How can you burn on? And the last few slides have some tools that we can use. This is a tool that I created. It's called the Wheel of Well-Being. And I use this tool during the recovery phase of burnout with my clients. And it helps my clients to kind of measure their different energy levels and identify where there might be a deficiency, and then start coming up with ways to recharge their batteries. And this is based on the concept of the four sources of energy. So we need a source of energy for the body, for the emotions, for the mind, and for the soul. And this is an important aspect. And one of the ways that we recharge our soul is through playing. And I would like to invite everybody who's with us today just to ask yourselves, when was the last time you played? And playing is an activity that we do for the sake of the activity, nothing else. There's no other objective. Playing is a very, very, very important aspect of our well-being. So it's about balancing all four forces and learning how to recharge them all. But also there are some other positive psychology interventions that can be used to build, to find meaning in our lives. This is also very important for our soul battery. So we build on purpose and meaning. Self-integrity is very important also for the soul battery. So knowing self-awareness, first we start with self-awareness, know your strengths. For strength-based coaching is very important in burnout recovery. And I mean, the biggest two schools in the strength-based coaching is Gallup and VEA character strengths. And even Gallup, I mean, VEA character strength, it is a positive psychology tool, so it just makes sense. It aligns well. Gallup also are trying to kind of build the momentum around using the Gallup strengths to recover from burnout. But understanding your strengths and also understanding your values and incorporating that into your life. All of this is really, really important for sustained well-being and sustained recovery from burnout. How are we on time? Because I get a tendency to kind of talk a little bit. So I just want to make sure that we're okay on time. I think we're okay, but I just want to make sure.
We are okay. We have 20 minutes more.
Okay. I just have like 2 more slides, something like that.
Okay.
And again, maybe I'm a little bit biased because I studied positive psychology and I studied it I studied positive psychology coaching. I need to be more specific. And I studied it because I wanted to integrate it into burnout and burnout coaching. And I came across this study that was done, and it took a positive psychology approach to burnout. Now, in positive psychology, the hypothesis is that a lack of disease doesn't mean that we're healthy, like physically. If we don't have diseases, it doesn't mean that we're healthy physically. There are certain measures that we use to make sure that we're physically healthy. We have like blood pressure, body mass index, all those important measurements. So the first things they wanted to address in positive psychology was, what are the measures of being, psychologically healthy? Just the lack of disease, that doesn't make sense. So this study also asked the question, the lack of burnout, does that mean that the employee would be engaged, if we're going to say that engagement is the healthy side? And again, it was conducted in the workplace. And if an employee is engaged, does this mean that they're going to flourish? So this study wanted to answer this question. And they conducted a survey using the job person fit model. This model it talks about how to match between an individual and a job by using 6 factors. The more you can align between the individual's expectation and these factors and what is actually offered, the better the fit, and therefore the better the engagement. But they also wanted to see if that meant that burnout will diminish. Now, if you look at these 6 factors, we have workload, which it talks about capacity, but also not just capacity, the nature of work, kind of work that is done. Control talks about autonomy and how much autonomy does the person have in the workplace, and how much autonomy does the person want to have in the workplace. Reward and recognition, of course, a sense of community. Do I have a sense of belonging in the workplace? Fairness, and fairness talked about 2 things, about how people are, ethics within the workplace itself, are people treated fairly, but also the industry. Is this a fair industry in terms of like the environment, human rights violation, and also values. So the study found that the more alignment there was between what the individual expected or desired in these 6 factors and what was actually offered through the job, the higher the engagement rates. The greater the mismatch, the greater the burnout rates. However, if the employee is engaged, it doesn't mean that they're going to be immune from burnout. This was an important finding. So I like to focus on this part. The greater the mismatch, the higher the possibility of burnout. Now, if we look at these factors again, if we take workload, for example, and focus on the nature of work, and we start to apply a strength-based approach to management, and we allow employees to do their jobs utilizing their strengths, this will create a better workload from a term of the nature of the work. So they're not changing their tasks. And we can do this through job crafting. Job crafting is one of the tools that we use, where they kind of tailor their job around their strengths without changing the tasks or the responsibilities. Also, control. Depending on our values, we'll find that there are people who value time. There are other people who value decision-making. So autonomy differs from one person to another, but we all need a certain level of autonomy. So we'll find that, and of course, reward and recognition. It really depends on our values and what a person values. A sense of community. How we feel the sense of community is important. And this would go back maybe to more of our personality. You'll find that an introvert seeks a sense of community that goes deeper than it's not superficial kind of connection. It's deeper connection with a limited number of people, where extroverts would need exposure to a bigger number of people, and it doesn't need to have this, deep connection. And fairness is more ethics, but we would find this in via character strength, depending on the signature strengths of individuals, their perception of ethics would differ, and of course, values. So I looked at the study and I saw a lot of self-integrity, what I call self-integrity, where we're integrating between us as an individual through our personality, our values, our strengths, our emotions, our thoughts, and how we live our lives, whether it's in the workplace or outside the workplace. Because I often tell my clients, like, if you cannot find yourself in your job, find it elsewhere. Sometimes a job is just a means to an end. It's just an income, and that's okay. But then if you're going to go back to this, sorry, went back to the slide that has all the animation. Sense of purpose, which we can find it through the 6 factors. If you cannot find it in your job, look for it elsewhere. Look for it in meaningful moments that we create through creativity and playing, that we create through belonging to other people and giving them quality time. It doesn't have to be a lot of time. Also, your relationship with yourself. And other experiences like with nature, and this would come under self-integrity. If nature is like important to you, then you need these quality time with nature or spirituality or whatever. It really depends on your values and your strengths. So this is how I kind of read this research. But also I see, because I'm a leadership coach, and I talk to this with a lot of leaders who I coach, and I also teach leadership. It's like there's no one size fits all, and we have to accept that we are all unique. And the problem is when we want to unify how we manage people, how we lead them, and also how we lead our lives. This is when problems like burnout start to pop up. But as human beings, we are all different, we are all unique, and we have to embrace that. And therefore, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to leading and managing, and therefore well-being. This is another tool. I mean, this is self-determination theory. This is a theory we use in motivation. But also, because this is the top part is the self-determination theory, but it's also kind of mirrored in the active engagement approach. And as we can see, more autonomy is needed to feel intrinsically motivated, because sometimes burnout can be a lack of motivation. So as individuals, we need autonomy, we need freedom. We cannot, we cannot feel that we are enslaved to a job or even enslaved to responsibilities. And that takes us back to reframing our relationship with productivity. When we see this job as something that leads us to our values, that's all we do. We just work on the perception. No, we don't tell clients to change their jobs, unless, of course, it's like a toxic environment or something like that. But really, it's just changing your relationship. you will find that there's a lot of freedom in understanding that these are not obligations. These are responsibilities that you willingly took on because they help you feed into your values, which might be family or might be a sense of purpose. So I do believe that intrinsic motivation that is rooted in autonomy and meaningful experiences is very, very, very important in sustaining burnout recovery. And again, we can find this in various aspects, not just at work, but in our lives in general. And I would continuously go back to the wheel of well-being and look at the various ways that we recharge and understand that these are choices that we are making because they are important to us. They speak to something that's really intrinsic to us and it's core to who we are. And the moment that we kind of venture outside of this internal compass and start to respond to external motivators is when sometimes we lose our way and we lose our focus. So these were just some of the tools and theories that kind of guide my practice when I'm working with the recovering burnt out clients. Because I do tell them it's like you're a recovering addict. It's one day at a time. You set your intention and you start every day trying to do your best and live your best. If you don't have a good day, that's okay. You just enter the next day as if it's a new day. So you're continuously recovering from burnout. And that's it. Should we open the floor to questions? I think
Thank
there
you
were questions.
so much, Amira. I have a question from your experience, Amira, around the world. Now, where do you find like a good practice or good example of well-being in organization? The second question is, how do you convince leaders to adapt a well-being program when sometimes employees say we have no problem coaching culture, we have no problem in well-being, but we have problem with leaders to believe in this program. So what is the also big good practice to convince the top leaders to adapt well-being, and what is the best practice you see around the world?
Well, I mean, when it comes to convincing leaders, I always tell them that you do not lead lofty well-being programs that are costly. There are so many things that can be done that don't cost a lot of money. But again, there's not a one size fits all. So they have to listen to their employees and understand their needs. And we're seeing these needs are changing, especially with younger generations. And it's not just well-being needs, it's needs in general. There's this huge clash between Generation Z and the older generation. And I'm seeing this everywhere. It's not just in Egypt, it's not just in Gulf regions, but in other countries. So it's just listening, learning something like active listening. That's like, it's one of the simplest things that can be done, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. But also I can understand there's a dichotomy there. You know, a lot of people, they see well-being programs like, what is the return on this investment? Don't invest a lot. Don't invest a lot. You know, don't invest a lot. When we go in with a strength approach, especially if we use Gallup, then VIA, they're kind of more open to it because of the terminology. Although I think VIA is healthier in terms of well-being. But when we go with a strength approach, they're more open to listen to the dialogue because they can see a direct connection between the strengths and performance, just because of the terminology. Because if we look back at personality and like the big five, conscientiousness. So when we go and tell them, well, conscientiousness is like achiever, it's like responsibility, it's like they're open to the dialogue more than VIA. But a strength-based approach is really, a lot of leaders are open to listen to that. But at the end, I tell individuals, you are responsible of your own well-being. So if you cannot find that support in your organization, you should work on your own well-being. And that goes for leaders as well. It's difficult to ask leaders to think about their employees' well-being when their own well-being is kind of not where it's at. So I recommend that they work on their own well-being and take, very little steps can be taken that really can enhance well-being in the workplace. I mean, when it comes to implementing well-being practices, what I'm seeing so far that they're more wellness than well-being, and there is a difference. Like a lot of health things, healthy eating, we have like a movement, and there can be gamification approach to tracking movement and things like that. I don't see a lot of well-being, but there are some organizations who have well-being support. If like the medical insurance doesn't cover mental health, they have a separate provider for mental, so they're working with mental health providers. So it's more like providing mental health services. But a lot of what I'm seeing is more wellness than well-being. And I find that working with middle management has a greater impact than we're actually working with top management. And it's about educating them on things like psychological capital, which is well-being. We just don't call it well-being because well-being is kind of, people see it as something that's frou-frou. And so when you call it psychological capital, and this actually, we see this in positive leadership, and this is under the discipline of leadership, and we see it in positive organizational behavior. And there's a lot of studies now about the impact of psychological capital on performance, on aptitude, on unethical behavior, all those outputs. So we have enough research to kind of support education and building psychological capital. And working with middle management, I find it yields greater results. The scope is bigger than just top management.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone have question? I think they want to share, if you can share the study you mentioned.
Yes, I will. I mean, it's an old study. It's from 1996. It was conducted. One of the researchers was Christina Maslach, because Christina Maslach is there. There were two main researchers in Burnout, and Christina Maslach was one of them. But I can actually send the paper to Coach Reda, and she can share it with the slides.
Great. Any question? Lucia was asking.
The downward spiral, the name of the researcher is underneath the drawing. If anybody wants to refer to that.
You can share the slides with the audience.
Yes, definitely. I will share the slides. Definitely.
I received it already. I'm gonna share it with the participants. No worries. Yeah. Thank you.
Any question, please? You can unmute yourself.
I see a lot of people, they're talking about toxic work environment, toxic moody boss. I think the important thing is to remember that you can't change human beings. You cannot change anybody's behavior. You're only in control of your own. So it's how you respond to a toxic environment, and a toxic boss will really make the world of difference than trying to change a toxic boss or a toxic environment. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Pleasure to have you, Amira. Thank you. And inshallah, we'll see you also in coming webinars in ICF Kuwait chapter. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for your very informative presentation. Highly appreciate your time and efforts. I think we can have a group photo, Ghalia or Rana, if you don't mind. Amira, you would like to share anything at the end?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity. I will share the slides, inshallah. And if anybody has any questions, I mean, they can get my contact information from Coach Reda and anybody from ICF Kuwait. It's a passion of mine. I suffered from burnout multiple times, so I really liked, spreading the awareness. So if anybody has any questions, wants to know anything regarding the latest studies or anything, feel free to contact me, and I'd be more than happy to kind of share whatever information I have.
Thank you.